Hello and welcome to the Stealth is Optional group build submission stream. So this is going out live. Feel free to leave some comments in the chat box and let me know what you think of these submissions. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minutes, and today we're going to have a quick look through all of the different submissions for this group build which took place over on our Discord server recently. There were quite a lot of submissions this time round, so I'm going to try my best to get through these as quickly as possible whilst highlighting the different elements of each build. So without any further ado, we're going to get into this one. So the first thing we need to look at is the theme of this group build. So the themes for every group build are voted upon by the community and then selected as appropriate. This particular one is called Stealth is Optional. So the whole idea here is to build something that looks vibrant. It has a vibrant livery. It doesn't have to be something that was real life. It could be something that is fictional and you came up with yourself, but generally something that is otherwise going to stand out. So with that in mind, let's get into the actual submissions and see what people sent in for it. So first up, we're going to look at this one here. This is an F20 Tiger Shark in a paint scheme for a 2004 anime. So this is a CC Lee kit, and they say that they had some issues where there were big gaps in the fuselage and the wings. They have kitted this out with lots of missiles and rockets and things. And they did mention that they painted the canopy over because originally it went a bit foggy, so they decided to paint it instead. In such a small scale, I don't think that's too much of a problem, especially given in small scales such as this, you don't always get a cockpit, so painting the canopy can be a suitable choice. I quite like this one, it looks pretty cool, and I think the paintwork on it is really neat. So thanks for sending that one in. We're going to move on to the next one now. And we have, I can't say this person's name, Alan Kowicki Zerex number 7. I think that's the correct pronunciation, but I may have butchered it. This is a monogram Ford Thunderbird. They say this is a kit from the 80s that has aged better than expected. They say they had quite a lot of fun building it up, and it would be suitable for a diorama, but they haven't quite got to that point yet. This kit was chosen because it has some sort of NASCAR history, which was quite relevant. And it has a vibrant paint scheme. So you can see lots of different colours on there, as well as all the different sponsors. Just looking through the notes that they've sent over, they say that the kit doesn't have any particularly bad detail. It does come with some pit equipment as well, which they've not used in this particular build. But I think you can see in the images here that they have displayed the engine, where you can take the bonnet or hood, as the Americans would say, off and see what was inside. That's a very cool and clean looking car. I've not done any cars, so maybe I'll consider doing some in the future. Up next, we have a Italeri Hawk T1 in Swiss Flight School colours. They say that this kit went together pretty nicely. The instructions are fairly clear and the decals were perfect. They say they had a lot of fun building this kit and they're glad that it's finally complete. This does look pretty cool. The Swiss do like to have quite vibrant colours, typically a variation upon their own sort of national flag, and you can see that has been replicated here. I think you've done a good job of this one, but perhaps that line between the white and the red in the future, you might consider using, I think some more masking tape might actually make that a little bit neater, but on the whole, it's a very nice looking model. And I love that you've displayed the canopy open as well, which means we can see all of the stuff inside the cockpit. So thanks for that. Let's move on to another aircraft with a slightly different paint scheme. So this is the Dassault Rafale M from Hasegawa. And this scheme features the Idolmaster DLC scheme for Ace Combat 6. It has an overall pink sort of scheme with white, and you can see the anime figure on it as well. And they've also done the display stand in pink as well. They say that the fit was pretty good. They didn't have to use much filler. Their only criticism with the tooling is that it features raised panel lines. They did have to mix their paint up themselves, which they used Mr. Hoppy lacquers to do this. The white areas were mostly applied as decals, and although they were cut to the accurate size by the manufacturer, in retrospect, they would prefer to have painted the white. They say the decals were quite a big problem. They were a little bit thick and didn't necessarily apply as well. They just refused to stick to the kit is the note I've got here. They did have to use a little bit of PVA to help glue them down. I think that despite the problems you had with the decals, and I can imagine they're being a little bit tricky to use given how big they are, you've done a fantastic job. And it is really fun to see aircraft in schemes like this. So thanks for sending it in. And we'll move on to another aircraft which has a interesting paint scheme, which is a 1/48 scale MiG-21 in a bunny fighter scheme. So this was the Founders Edition from Eduard, where they painted it up in their own fictional paint scheme with rabbits, and you can see like the missiles are carrots, and there's like grass on the underside and sky on the upper side, and the little cartoon rabbits. They said that this kit came with a ridiculous amount of resin and photo etch. The cockpit apparently has quite a lot of detail, a lot of resin, and that was a daunting task. They said that painting was pretty fun, but they did have to brush paint the grass, and the decals were pretty good too. Their only complaint is the resin landing gear. They would have preferred to use the regular plastic ones, but I guess the resin ones were a little bit more fiddly. I think this looks really fantastic. It's a really interesting paint scheme that Eduard came up with, and it sort of goes in line with their sort of club that they do. Great fun. Thanks for sending that one in. Let's move on to something a little bit different. Oh, Graham's got a question. Yes, it was 1/72nd scale, that Hawk. So this person has sent in a Drover quad based mobile weapons platform Auroch in Vocatus pattern. This is based on the Nactial Mobile Spotlight Fist of War Alternative History series by Model Collect in 1/72nd scale. They used extra bits from Knight Armigers by Games Workshop. They used other bits and pieces for the secondary guns, and they also included cogs and skull decors. Other bits and pieces were scratch built out of plasticard, bits of sprue, and green stuff. The base was constructed from wood, a little bit of styrofoam, and some basing materials. They painted it with Army Painter, Italeri, and Vallejo products, and they say it was definitely an interesting experience to build it. Currently, it's the only land vehicle they have in the collection, and it needed to have a counterweight in the turret, I presume to make it not fall over. They did say the kit could be of a slightly better quality. The weakest part of the build is the leg assembly. It was designed to be articulated, but the execution is a little poor, which results in weak connection points. They went for a bright blue paint scheme because that's the colour of the Forge World Vocatus, which is their own homebrew AdMech faction. With that in mind, they did send in quite a bit of information about their own sort of lore behind this one. So the lore there is on the screen if you want to pause it and have a read about this particular vehicle and the background behind it. Absolutely do have a look at that. I do quite like this kind of thing that they've got going on here with their own fictional. It's a fictional thing, isn't it? So it's made up of something that's already fictional. So I think that's really good fun. And you know, people need to enjoy the models how they want to enjoy them. So I can see we've got quite a lot of people in the chat here. I'm just going to take a moment to see if there are any questions. Yep. So if you want to take part in the group builds, you need to be over on Discord. So there is a link to the group builds in Discord, and there's a link to Discord in the description of this video. We are currently on a group build at the moment. This one has obviously finished. So moving on, the next person is me, and it would make sense that I would submit something as part of the group build. This is a Revell Airbus helicopter EC135 in the ANW paint scheme in 1/72nd scale. I decided to build this one because it's been sitting in my stash for a while, and it's bright yellow, which I thought would be perfect. Generally, the level of detail is pretty good for this tooling, but it is a little bit old and it dates from 2001. It did suffer from excess flash in places. Oh, too far, skipped on. But the main problem with this kit is the molding of the clear parts is quite poor. I did do a lot of work to try and polish them and bring them up in their look, and also had to add filler around them, but ultimately it was a bit tricky. It was a bit tricky to get these to look right. It's not great. It's not a great kit, but it kind of works. I painted it with Outlaw Yellow, which actually was really nice paint to use. Perhaps it's a little bit warmer than the actual paint's colour that I should have used, but it was all right. The decals went onto the model okay too, and I did add a little bit of a wash just to bring out the details. On the whole, I'm generally happy with this, but I feel like the kit was let down by those poor quality clear parts. When you've got a kit like this, where there are a lot of clear areas, you would like to think that they would be molded to a good quality, but sadly they were not. And with that, let's move on to the next one, which we've all just very quickly seen, which is a Raphael M. Aggressor. This is the Academy boxing of the Revell kit in 1/48 scale, and they've gone for a custom paint scheme on this one. They say that the build was okay. It didn't have any real problems, apart from the fit between the wing roots and the fuselage, which they had to resolve with some putty. The camo pattern was made by themselves. It's a sort of JSDF Aggressor 15 inspired kit or scheme, specifically the F15DJ Lionfish scheme. The decals were inspired by Top Gun training units, but not anything in particular. Most of the decals they used in the kit were printed at home by themselves, which includes the tail number, the roundels, and some of the nose step decals. Armament was taken from AIM 120s and AIM 9Ms, which they had in the spares box. Generally, they say it was a pretty easy build, and they were mostly focusing on the paint scheme, as that had to have a lot of experimentation to get it looking good. But actually, I think this looks fantastic. You know, fictional paint schemes are brilliant fun, which allow you to just have a play around with it and see what you can achieve. And your painting of this is absolutely fantastic. I love the way you've got nice bits of shading and stuff, and the fact that you've made your own decals for it as well. So yeah, very well done. Let's move on to perhaps something a little less aggressive, and that's a LET LF 107 Lunac from Admiral in 1/72 scale. So this is obviously a little glider. They say this was a nice little kit to have, although it wasn't the easiest to build. There are only 15 parts though. There was a lot of filling with the fuselage and the wings required, so the fit wasn't fantastic, and the details are effectively non-existent. They did have some issues with the paint because they thought pre-shading under yellow was a good idea, but then they found they struggled to build that up and have enough opacity over the top. They do like the red decals though. They think that they are quite eye-catching. They only paid €4 for this, which is really good value. And they were inspired to do this one because they recently started flying gliders themselves. And it's always good to replicate something that you've had experience with, I think. This looks fantastic. It is no doubt a fairly simple build, but you had your issues with the fit. But I think you've done a fantastic job. It's a nice, clean looking build. So well done. Let's move on to another fast jet. So this is an F-16C Block 50 2024 F-16 Viper demo from Tamiya in 1/72 scheme. This paint scheme was introduced in 2024 to celebrate 50 years since the first flight of the F-16 in 1974. So it's a throwback to the prototype, which had a scheme very similar to this. They say the build was pretty straightforward, everything fits together nicely, and the decals went on really well too. A small detail they added was to do with the pilot. So the helmet of the pilot was actually made to be in the same paint scheme as the helmet worn by the YF-16 test pilot, Philip F. Ostreicher, and they wanted to replicate that. They said they wanted to build this kit for a while, and they're now really happy that they had the opportunity to do so. And yeah, this is a sort of a throwback to the prototype F-16, but obviously a more modern version of the F-16, which is painted to replicate that. It's a really interesting paint scheme. You've got your red, white and blue, and I can see that you've made a really clean markation between all of the colours. That's fantastic. So well done for sending that one in. Next one up, we've got a captured FW190A8 in 1/72nd scale. So this is a airfix kit, and it's based off of an aircraft that was captured by the United States Army Air Force 404th Fighter Group. The aircraft was damaged from anti-aircraft fire after they'd attacked the wrong target and had to land in Belgium, where it was captured. It was then painted bright red, had the American insignia applied, and was given the code 00L and the false serial of 1145, which was the date that it was captured on. So fortunately, Airfix manufactures a A8 version, which is the version they used here. So they picked up that kit and found some suitable spare decals. The build was relatively easy, although the tooling is not quite up to modern standards, and I can relate to that because I have just done a Airfix FW190A8 as well. It's a nice kit to build, but there are some bits and pieces that need to be filled in and cleaned up. They said the majority of the painting was pretty simple, as it's all red all over. They did add a little bit of exhaust staining, but the difficult part was painting the codes and serials. They had to mask them themselves and then paint them on. So I wouldn't have known that you'd used masks for that because they look fantastic. I thought they were decals originally, but now that you mention it, yeah, they were painted on. And I think they say one of the favourite details is the JG4 emblem on the nose cowl. That was hand painted. They say it's not super detailed, but actually I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known that that wasn't hand painted on. I would have thought that was a decal. So well done. Very impressive. Love to see something like this. Let's move on. If it's going to play ball, there we go. Here we have another CC Lee F20 Tiger Shark in 144th scale. This is in a demonstrator livery. They say the Tiger Shark was actually a pretty nice little jet. It was privately funded and had a massive or really powerful engine. Perhaps the military would have gone with this one had they not decided to go for the F-16. So that's what it was competing with. The challenges they faced while building this model was that there were some fit issues, which I think the other person who also did the same kit mentioned as well. Some of the panel lines don't line up when you join the fuselage, and the kit didn't come with any cockpit parts, so in this case they actually scratch built some. The nose is missing the cannons, so they improvised by adding some of those, and they had some trouble with the paint as well. The white paint is always tricky. I know your problem here. They say that it was a bit thick. They thinned it down, and they had to apply 5 thin coats to get it looking about right. Once the white was dry, they went for crimson and red. However, it was too bright, so they had to tone down a little bit by adding some black. Once the painting was complete, they sprayed on a clear gloss, added the decals, and then glossed to protect. So yeah, it's this is a really cool build as well, isn't it? It must be really difficult to try and get a complicated paint scheme like this done in 144th scale, given that the kits are so small. I love that you've even picked out all of the sort of warning bands on the missiles and things as well. So well done for sending that one in. Let us now move on to a tank. So this one is a Meng World War II Tiger P. So this is a toon scale one, and the colour scheme is based off of a real life animal. So they call it a leopard, which is a lion and leopard hybrid. They say the build was pretty standard, with only the only major flaw being the turret. Using 4 parts to get the sides and underside and roof on was a lot, and left a gap at the back that required filling. Painting was done with an airbrush and a custom mix of colours to get the base tone of the fur attempt. You can see top right, that's what the paint scheme looks like before weathering, and then the other 2 images here are after weathering. I added the one at the top right because it shows how vibrant the paint scheme was before the weathering occurred, and then the weathering dulled everything down a little bit. So we've got a little bit of contrast there between the 2. This is a really sort of unique take on how to do paint schemes, and I thought it was really fun. So thanks for taking part. Let's move on to a twin otter. So this is a Revell 1/72 scale DHC6 twin otter in the Canadian Armed Forces paint scheme. They were going to do this one as part of a diorama, which I think you can probably see where they were going with this, because they've done it up to look like it has crashed. I think the intention here was to have it in a snowy environment. However, I believe that they may have run out of time. But that's all right. They've got the kit here in its kind of finished sort of pose, and you can see that they've done their best to replicate the yellow and red paint scheme on this one. I do have one of these in the stash. It's an X Matchbox kit, and I probably will do mine in a more pristine version when I come to do it, but I really like the direction that you took on this one. They say they left the doors off, they cut the doors off, left them off, because they would have been either kicked out or had fallen off during the landing. And in order to, I think they mentioned that they had a bit of trouble putting the yellow down, so they've added some heavy weathering to make it look as though it's been out exposed to the elements for quite a while, to kind of hide it. I don't think it looks too bad. I think it actually looks all right. Given that this has been damaged, it looks pretty decent. It would be nice to see if you follow this one up and actually add the diorama in the future. So thanks so much for taking part with that one. Let's move on to another vehicle. Captain VFC says that's cruelty to twin otters, but also that you love it. Yeah, it was good, wasn't it? This is a Revell Trabant 601 in 1/24 scale. They say this kit brought them much joy. Most of the parts fit together really nicely, but there is a big problem they encountered where a few parts should have been on sprue A, but actually on sprue B. So this comes down to Revell misidentifying things in their instructions. All in all, they're satisfied with this model, and it was their first car. They painted the model by brush, which you wouldn't have known because it looks really smooth. But in the future, they may pick a spray can or an airbrush to do so. Do you know what? I wouldn't have noticed if it had been painted by a brush if you hadn't have told me. It seems to me that you may have absolutely nailed the application of paint with a paintbrush. So well done there. I like that you can see inside of the bonnet and also in the boot, or as the Americans would say, hood and trunk, to the extra details that are in there. I like this one. It's a really nice, clean little build, and you've posed it outside in nature. So yeah, well done. Thanks for taking part. Let's move on to another aircraft. We do have a lot of aircraft. They tend to be the most popular subjects on our Discord server, but it's nice to see a good variety of them. This is an F4J Phantom 2 inspired by the Blue Angels in 1/72 scale. They say the F4 is inspired by the Blue Angels. It's only for air shows. It travels around the world every year, and they've called it the Sweet Red. They say the build went pretty okay, but there were some filling and sanding that had to be done. They say it's quite an old kit, and they wouldn't necessarily recommend this to a beginner. I'm not entirely sure which F4 kit this is. I'm not. You must have mentioned it on Discord, but I don't have it in my notes here. It does appear to be a little bit old. Maybe it's a Hasegawa or something like that. It does have raised panel lines that you can see in the images here. But I think you did a very nice job of getting some nice, neat paint. Perhaps a further improvement could be to find some decals for this one. I know that the Blue Angels had some sort of insignia on it, so maybe a future improvement could be to do that. But yeah, on the whole, pretty nice. Let's move on to a vehicle now. And we have a MAN Tiergem Schlingmann, and then a lot of German words that I can't read. Basically, this is a fire engine. They had done this one predominantly in bright red. And they say that it's 37 centimeters long, so it's pretty big. It weighs over 1/2 kilo and has hundreds of individual parts. It's the biggest and most ambitious project they've worked on so far. They say the kit was intricately detailed and well molded, but as it's an update, so this particular release is an update to a previous version which came out. There are some modifications to get things to fit together properly. The part that they thought would be the worst or the most difficult part was painting something the size of a toaster, so that gives you an idea of how big it is, in the gloss red. But they actually said that it went on okay, and there weren't any really any problems with that. The main problem being, would they have enough paint? They've used Vallejo Model Air for the chrome, whereas everything else is Revell Aqua. So I've got a couple of images here. You can see they've gone for different lighting effects in this one, and you can see they've got a hurricane on there to show you the size, and a coin. So it's quite a big fire engine. But if we just move to the next couple of images, you can see we've got some more traditional photos. I think worth pointing out is that they added a little more life and visual interest to the vehicle, where they've actually asked real life firefighters to say, you know, what would you put on the inside of this? And they said that they would put different binders and documentation on the dashboard, as well as like a mascot. So that's what they've done here. You can see that in the front windscreen. You do have to be careful when you have something as big as this, so that you don't damage any of the fine details when you're handling it, which has, they say, been a challenge in their own way. Nonetheless, they're quite pleased with the final results, and you should be very proud because this does look very impressive. I've not built a fire engine before, but I could be tempted to explore one in the future. Maybe I'll try and add some lights or something to it. So yeah, well done. Very well done. Thanks for sending that one in. Let's move on to another aircraft. This one is an Italeri F-104G Starfighter. This is from Starfighters Aerospace, which is a private company out of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. This does aerobatic shows with their fleet of F-104 Starfighters, and also supports science projects and space launches. These F-104 Starfighters are known for their shiny paint jobs in bright blue, white and natural metal. For this build, they had to do some research to find out the modifications that would be appropriate for this particular aircraft, and they had to make some modifications to the cockpit. Challenges were using lacquer primer for the first time. It did remain a bit sticky throughout the build, they say, so it's possible at that point it wasn't quite cured. So I've had it in the past where I've used paints which have remained sticky. It's because I didn't mix them enough, so definitely worth checking that and reading the sort of guidance notes that the manufacturer provides, just to make sure you're sort of following that along. They did say they used some Tamiya masking tape as well, but it stuck to the primer and they had to remove that with some solvents and then sand everything back down. If you hadn't have mentioned that, I wouldn't have known. So obviously you did a very good job of cleaning that all up. To get the blue of the decals to match with the overall blue colour was okay, but you might be able to notice a slight difference in shade, but again, it's not that noticeable. Overall, they're pretty happy with the results, as it adds a colourful model to the collection. And yes, I think you've done a very nice and clean job of this particular kit. It does look very impressive, so well done. Let's move on to another aircraft in a different colour, and this is a 1/72nd scale Eduard MiG-21MF from a Profipack kit. So this model is pretty detailed, and it's quite good for its price. You do get masks and photo etch as well. They say that the decals were a little oversized. They did apply them without any real problems though, and put varnish over the top. They say the kit is generally easy to build and worth the money that you pay, but it has got a few small issues, so they rated it an 8 out of 10. I quite like this one. I think you've done a good job of it. I like that you've got your canopy open and you can see the wealth of detail in there. It may not be so clear to see, but on the top right image there is actually like a figure with a sort of, what is it, like a ladder to get inside of the aircraft. I don't know if that came with the kit. It isn't mentioned, but it's nice to see things posed differently. So yeah, well done. Thanks for sending that one in. Up next we've got something a lot different. This is an ICM 1/16th scale Viking Warrior. This is Sigurd. This is what they've called it. They've called him Sigurd, a 1/16th scale Viking warrior, which is about 4 inches tall. They say that the build was good. They largely went together pretty well. There are no assembly instructions, so you just have to pretty much figure out yourself. There were a little gap here and there, so they added some green stuff to fix that. For a painting, they went with historical reconstructions rather than looking at like Hollywood kind of styles. So they went for the Angus McBride illustrations from the Osprey reference books. The figure is all hand painted in acrylics, which is a mix of Vallejo and scale 75 paints, and they use the non-metallic metal painting technique for the metal elements. They say it was a good, easy build and an interesting mix of techniques in the painting. I really like this. Now, I'm not a fantastic figure painter. I struggle with my figures, but this is like really good. I can imagine back then the Vikings, you know, they're not really going for stealth, are they? They are standing out. They are quite, you know, here I am. And I can see that replicated here in how you've painted up their shield and things. You can see there's like little scratches and stuff as well, where they've obviously been using it. So yeah, very well done indeed. Let's move on then. This is an aerospace shell, Gazelle, in a zebra camo finish. This is an Airfix 1/72 scale kit. It's an old kit. It's been in the stash, they say, for about 20 years, and they decided to join the group build last minute and have a go at painting it in a fictional paint scheme. In the end, they say it went from bag to base. They put it on a little sort of desert base in 3 days, and they had a lot of fun doing so. It was hand painted, which I think looks fantastic. You've done a good job of it. And they think that it would belong somewhere like a wildlife park, like Longleat, or maybe like Chester Zoo or something like that, as a sort of nod to the fact that it works with these animals. I really like this. I think it looks really fun. This zebra paint scheme helicopter. So yeah, well done. Thanks for sending that one in. Let's look at a Fokker DR1. So this is the Revell triplane in 1/72 scale, obviously painted in a bright red paint scheme, which would make it stand out as it was flying above the trenches. They say the build was generally okay. There aren't that many parts, but they did struggle with adding the top wing to the rest of the plane. I can imagine, yeah, it can be quite difficult doing biplanes and triplanes and getting everything aligned. I know I definitely experienced that in a recent build. They went for Tamiya matte red. They painted it all over, and they say the decals were of a good quality too. It wasn't too time consuming. I think I remember you posting this one in the group build server, and it was like you started it and then like 2 days later it was done. So you absolutely whizzed through this one. They did say something that was annoying about the build was there's quite a lot of flash on this though. I think it's quite an old tooling. I don't think it's as old as the Airfix tooling, but it's not like a modern tooling. So yeah, I can imagine there'll be quite a bit of flash. They did say that they would have liked to have added a white base primer as well to make the red a little bit more vibrant, but I wouldn't worry about that because I think your red is bright enough. So yeah, well done. A nice clean build. Let's move on to this one, which is absolutely fantastic. This is an A model 1/72 scale GB Racer, which no doubt is absolutely tiny. They said the kit itself went up really nicely. There was only a little bit of putty needed to fix it in a few places. And they did say that the main problem with the kit is that the decals are a bit bigger than they should be. But that wasn't a problem because they didn't use the kit decals. They actually ended up painting it as a bee. The plane rigging is made using copper wire. And the plant is a 3D printed resin plant. So what's happening here is that the GB is a bee and it's been caught by this carnivorous plant. Both the plane and the plant are covered in Tamiya acrylic clear gloss to give it a nice shiny finish. And I think what paints did you use? All the paints used on it are metallic, although the painted plane lacked dynamics. Hence the flower tries to catch it because regular. So effectively the plant was introduced as the display stand to hold it flying in the air. I love it. I think it's a really unique and fun sort of plane, and it's almost like a diorama, isn't it, really? Something's happening here. So yeah, well done. Thanks so much for sending that one. Let's move on to another car. Here we have a 1971 Dodge Charger 426 Hemi in 1/25 scale. This is a model kit from AMT. They say this was their first car model ever, and they're really pleased with the results of the build and hope others enjoy it as well. For this build, they wanted to do something in pink and found this kit in their local shop for $20 and had a go at it. They did say there was a bit of flash in the kit, which they had to clean up, but it wasn't too bad to fix. They used a variety of different paints for this. They used Vallejo, Humbrol, and even some of Walmart's own paint. They say on the whole, they are really happy with how the build went and that it's now complete. And yeah, I think you've done a good job. It looks very cool. It's very vibrant. It's a bit like that Thunderbirds one, isn't it? There was a pink car in Thunderbirds. I forget what it was now, but it's sort of leaning on that. I think you've done a fantastic job. It's a very nice, clean build. So yeah, well done. Let's move on to a plane. So this is a 1/72 scale Airfix Spitfire Mark 1, but it's been done in Air Koryo's passenger airliner livery from, I think, Japan. They say the build is, it's an Airfix Spitfire Mark 1, so it's fairly easy. The only decal they probably use for this one will be for the control panel, but they say they really struggled with the painting. They did it all freehand, as I'm sure we can probably tell here, and I definitely recommend the next time you get the chance to in your model shop that you get some masking tape, because you might find it will help an awful lot. But I guess at the time you didn't have any. So, well done for persevering. The fun part was putting all the bits together. And they do say that they did mess up some of the painting and had to go back over it with white and things. But it's practice and it will come with time. So just stick with it. And I look forward to seeing where you go in the future. Moving on, we have the one that we probably saw in the thumbnail. This is an Academy 1/48 scale CT133 Silver Shark. Just looking at the chat, yes, you may be correct. The Air Koryo is not from Japan. It may be from somewhere else. You may be correct in that. I don't know, to be honest. So if you know, let me know. Yeah, so this is the Silver Shark Academy 1/48 scale CT133. This is an older hobbycraft tooling from the early 90s. They say the build was pretty straightforward with no major issues, but the detail was a bit soft in places. What they decided to do to upgrade this kit was to add rivets everywhere. They love rivets, they've got here in big bold text. They wanted to keep the weathering down, so to show off the fact that this is a show scheme, but it is also a Canadian aircraft, so it'll probably get dirty anyway. The decals are from Leading Edge, and they've used a lot of different products from them in the past, and they are always perfect. They say this was the quickest they finished a kit in recent months. It usually takes ages for them to finish a small plane, but they really enjoyed this one and it didn't take too long. And I think you've done a good job. I think the rivets definitely add a lot of weight to this model. I think the way that you've made this look, if you hadn't have riveted it, it would have looked like an old kit, but the way that you've upgraded it, it makes it look like a more modern tooling, and your painting and your decal application, etc. It's really nice. So yeah, well done. As a small side point, I do actually normally pick a couple of different images and put it in the server and let people vote on which one they think should be the sort of thumbnail for the stream. And this one was obviously chosen given how nice it looks. But well done to the other people who did submit them as well and were voted on. But I guess everyone kind of liked this one the most. So well done. Thank you so much. Let's move on to another plane. This is a Hella Saab 91 Sapphire in Norwegian Air Force training colours, circa 1972. This is from the Norwegian Air Force Flight Training School. This kit from Hella was the original release in 1981, but it has been available a number of times, and there is a re-release out there as well. I think it's still currently available somewhere. These were using the 1980s decals, so being an original release, and they're very happy that they didn't fall apart. Hella decals, I actually recently built a Hella kit, and the decals were acceptable. And I built a 90s Airfix kit recently as well, and again, they were okay. So there seems to be a point where they sort of are still usable, but I think it depends on the manufacturer. They say that the kit was pretty simple. There aren't that many parts. It went together reasonably well, especially given its age. They did ruin a few little bits, they say, with little fingerprints in places, but I can't notice any, so don't worry too much about that. They did try to film the build, and I presume you're trying to make a video for it, but bit of filming and painting at the same time can be a little bit difficult. So they say that as a result, they were out of focus and missed filming what they were supposed to be doing. And I've been there, I've done that. Sometimes you just have to go back and sort of redo it, or just not show it, I suppose, or just mention that you did it. They're happy with their first built and painted scale model for quite literally decade. So it sounds like you've just returned back to the hobby. And yeah, well done. I think it's good sometimes to just like get back into it, just do something that you want to have fun with, and don't put too much stress on yourself. But I think you've done a good job of this one, so well done. Right, now we're moving on to the Gnat segment. So I've put all of the Gnats together because we've got quite a few. We've got about 3, I think. This is the 1/72 scale Airfix Folland Gnat. They say it's not a bad kit to build, and I would agree with that. The Airfix Gnat is a fairly decent little kit. There were a few little bits where there was a questionable fit, and I can relate to that as well. There are a few little bits which need, sanding and maybe a little bit of filling in places, but it's fairly decent. I haven't done one of these in this paint scheme. I don't know what it is about this. It just looks complicated, so I've always avoided it and gone for the more simple paint schemes. But you actually, stuck with this one and had a go at it, which is really good. They say the red is a little inconsistent because they painted the red over the top, and because the red went over the top of different sort of shades in places, it doesn't look as consistent as it perhaps might have done. If it was me, I'd probably do like white, then mask the white, and then do the red, and then mask the sort of nose and do the black. That's probably where I would go with it. But I think the underside has different colors as well. I'm not sure. They say they don't think they'd do this kit again as it's very small. They normally do 1/48, so that's probably what they would consider in the future. But yeah, no, I think you did a good job of this. Definitely a challenge. I know I would probably struggle with doing this paint scheme, so well done. And on that vein, a Gnat, we're going to move on to the same kit, but in a slightly different way. So in this one, you can see that we've gone for a little diorama base. I think previously they add the crew. No, they didn't add the crew in this one, but in this one they have. So it's the same kit. Let's read the notes for this one. They say it's a nice challenge. They mentioned the fact that it needed a little bit of sanding, a little bit of filling. In this one, they've added a gloss varnish to enhance the look of it. They were not too much of a fan over the fact that this had over 50 decals for the little stencils and things, but I think you did a good job. The base though, and this is what I like about group builds, is people tend to add extra bits and pieces, so definitely think about that if you're taking part in the next or the current group build. Is what can I do that will make mine a little bit different? They added this base, which is pieces of cardboard, and they stippled on different colors of paint to create the texture of the sort of tarmac / concrete. And then there is a yellow stripe and some grass as well to add a little bit more visual interest. Again, a very nice looking aircraft, a very clean build. Probably not a paint scheme that I would quite have the confidence to have a go at myself, but I think yours looks fantastic. And now we're going to move on to the last Gnat. And this is, again, another Airfix Gnat. However, this is the 1/48 scale one in a yellow jack paint scheme in 1964. This one they did as part of 2 group builds. I think they did this as part of the 48-hour group build. So they actually did this one. They did a 48 kit in 48 hours, quite quickly. So actually they did mention that they kind of got a bit delayed starting. So they only actually really had 24 hours to do this one. So, for a 24-hour build, this is phenomenal going. They say the engineering of this kit is the 1/48 scale one, so everything's a little bit bigger. They say the engineering was pretty decent, everything was spot on. the fit of the parts is pretty good, and there's nothing really in the way of flash. They started in the cockpit and they hand painted the instrument panels, but you can't really see that on there. But they did have an issue when they were airbrushing. They hadn't completely cleaned it out, and they went to do their gloss coat at the end, but it did kind of make it a bit blotchy because there was some other paint in there at the time. So if you're having a look for it, you might be able to notice a sort of blob or a blotch of a different shade on the aircraft, but I wouldn't have noticed if you hadn't have told me. You did leave a lot of notes. I'm just going to try and paraphrase. They do say here, if you want to build a kit like this, definitely have a think about doing it as a short duration. Have a go at it over 24 hours or 48 just to see if you can get it done, because you might have a lot of fun. They do mention about the primer. So they went for a white primer. It was more of a white peach. So they used Mr. Color white peach. So they did a white primer, white peach, and then sprayed yellow over the top, and they say that has resulted in a really nice vibrant yellow colour, which is good. That might be something I'll look in the future. I've only ever done white and then yellow, but yeah, no, good. I like this. It's a slightly different one to the previous Gnat, so yeah, well done. Let's move on to something that is not a Gnat now. This is a 4D model, 1/72 scale BTR 80 in a United Nations paint scheme. They say it is a simple kit, not much to talk about, but it's a nice base to make your own modifications or further upgrade it. Sadly, they say they didn't have a more modern figure lying around, so they've used a spare World War II figure and painted him to look as though he's part of the UN. The UN, of course, would use bright white painted vehicles to make them stand out as peacekeepers rather than more traditional camouflage vehicles of, military organisations. This does look to be a pretty nice build. I can imagine being a 4D model, it's not very taxing. It doesn't take too much to do. But yeah, good job. Well done. Let's move on to another very vibrant vehicle, which is the Jurassic Park Explorer from Lindbergh in 1/20th scale. They say it's not movie accurate, but that has more to do with the kit's tooling than anything else. Apparently the kit was out in the shops before the movie had even released. So that means that it's not going to be movie accurate because they haven't based it on the movie. The colour painting instructions were also wrong, so they have made it a bit more accurate in that respect, but the biggest problem were the decals. They kept tearing and disintegrating. Additionally, they mentioned that the decals weren't even printed in the right colours. So they say they really should have masked the stripes, but oh well. You can still see some of the lime green from the original where they tried to trim it away, but it was hard for them to see on the blue backing paper. So there are a few little bits and pieces in places which aren't quite perfect in your opinion, but I think they're okay. I think it looks all right because, on a real vehicle, sometimes you get the vinyl going on it and it does have little edges to it. They say that it was quite a fun build, very glad to be done with it, but also glad to have it on display as part of both modelling and Jurassic Park history. I think you've done a good job of that one. It looks fantastic, nice and clean. I love the sort of gradient between the green and the yellow. That's been very neatly done. Yeah, big fan of this. They do want to mention about the splitting issue with the paint on the roof. So the bottom right image would probably point this one out the most. So they applied their varnish and then they put another layer of water-based red acrylic, but it pulled the red, the varnish, and 2 layers of red, a layer of green enamel and a yellow enamel and a layer of primer off. So basically it sounds like your paint might have been too hot at that point, but it sort of peeled it off to the bare plastic, but it looks like weathering. If I'm being honest, it just looks like weathering, so don't worry too much about it. So well done, love this one, good stuff. Let's move on to a TAP or TAP A321 Neo in its factory primer colours. So this is the Zvezda Airbrush A321 Neo, and this is a replica of a real plane. Sorry, this isn't an exact replica of a real plane. It's based off of images that you can find online, but it isn't any specific one, but it's, inspired heavily by. It's one of those that has been like freshly built, and it's about to go to the next place to have its painted livery applied. So this is like factory fresh. They say the fit of the parts was pretty good, but the painting process consisted of mixing a lot of yellows and greens, and there was a lot of masking, which I can imagine because you've got to do the different panels and things. They say the decals were pretty good, but there was a little silvering. The middle right door decal got a little bit messed up when you're applying it, so that's a bit of a frustration, they said, but I can't really notice that from here. Generally, they say they're pretty happy and they love the way this one looks, and they're looking forward to trying other Airliner kits in the future. Yeah, this is good fun. It does certainly look unique. It does certainly stand out. It could be interesting to explore, factory fresh models in the future as well. So yeah, definitely food for thought. Well done. Thanks for sending that one in. Right. We have moved on to a 144th scale Eurofighter Typhoon from Revell. This is in the Bronze Tiger livery. They don't have anything particularly bad to say about the kit. There's not that much in the way of flash. They did have to make some adjustments to the outboard main landing gear doors though, but the main negative about this kit was the clear parts being a bit thick. Yes, if it's a Revell kit, they tend to have fairly questionable clear parts I've found in some older toolings. Some areas of the kit were straightforward to do, but then other areas such as the intake feel a little over-engineered for the scale. And then the cockpit, as a contrast, was quite simple. They did add some extra details such as seatbelts and an ejection handle inside of the cockpit. The livery is a tiger meat livery, which can be a challenge in itself. There were a lot of decals to apply, which made it its own challenge and quite time consuming. It's worth mentioning that the instructions say that some decals should be placed first, but some additional thinking ahead is required with the pylons, for example. So make sure if you are doing this, you don't necessarily glue everything on because you might have to wrap decals around other bits. For the paint, they mixed together some Tamiya yellow, red and aluminium. They said it was a little too orange, but generally they're fairly happy with the results. All in all, turned out pretty good. They say it was a good kit, great build experience and really good value for money. The decals were a little bit difficult perhaps, but they definitely bring it together at the end. So yeah, I like this. It is definitely very vibrant and interesting. I presume the orange is painted and then all the stripes and things are the decals, which no doubt are a bit of a challenge. But I think in such a small scale, you persevered and you've done a good job. So well done. Let's move on to another fighter aircraft. It's not a Rafale. Was this a Rafale? Was it a Rafale? Is that what you said it was? No, a Eurofighter, sorry. This is a Eurofighter. We're moving on to another Eurofighter. Could have a Eurofighter segment as well. This is a Blackjack Eurofighter, again from Revell, but a much larger scale this time. This is 1/48 scale. They say they're really happy with how this one turned out. They were trying to get a nice, clean, sharp finish of accurate colours, but it did put up a little bit of a fight in places with the decals on this one. They say the decals looked amazing on the sheet, but some of them, in particular the massive Union Jack on the belly, were a pain to get down nice and clean. They did use Microsol to help apply them, but they've had to make some edits. They've had to cut the decals in places to make them behave and fit more or less accurately. They don't quite fit as nicely as they would have liked in a few places, and you can see in some of the images that they don't quite align perfectly, but that's probably more to do with Revell's design of them rather than your application. They say that their kit came from a dodgy batch where the canards were moulded at the wrong angle, which is a bit of a frustration. They attempted to fix the issue, but the whole issue itself was that it's angled upwards and there wasn't enough sprue support to bend it into shape. For the finish, they've airbrushed Vallejo gloss varnish over the entire surface and sprayed in light mist coats to avoid leaving any orange peel. Generally, they're pretty happy with how it looks. They did this all about 2 weeks to complete. It does look very impressive. I think you've done a fantastic job. I can imagine that those decals would be an absolute pain, especially the ones on the lower side, but it does bring everything together and it looks fantastic. So very good job there. Thanks for taking part. Let's move on. This is a Z226 MS trainer from Eduard in 1/48 scale. They say that unfortunately they don't feel it's their best work, but they've grown to appreciate the kit. They say the thing they think that ruined it for them is the weathering, and they may have overdone it. But in the terms of it being like a trainer aircraft, it probably would have been more looked after, and they think they've added a bit too much. I don't think so. I think it looks okay. I think your painting is really well done, and the weathering just sort of goes along with someone who perhaps doesn't look after their plane. If they're using it as a trainer aircraft, perhaps they just don't have time to look after it, and they've been using it like every day. Maybe they're taking people on like pleasure flights or whatever. So the amount of weathering that's happened here could be justifiable. I think this looks good. It definitely has that Eduard look to it with those rivets and things. It could be interesting to explore one of these myself, but I'll have to look at that into the future. So yeah, very nice. Good job. Let's have a look at another training aircraft now. And this is a Airfix 1/48 scale Tiger Moth. This is painted or reproduced in the colours of the RAF Central Flying School display team. They say it's a pretty simple and detailed kit. I actually do have one of these in the stash somewhere, and I would like to have a go at that. But my main problem is that people are going to tell me to put the rigging on. I noticed in yours you didn't put the rigging on, and that's kind of what I would like to do. I'd just like to build it and not rig it. But I suppose in 1/48 scale it is a little bit more noticeable that there is no wiring on it. They do mention that they did want to try and do the rigging, but they didn't really have the capacity for it at the time, which, is understandable. It happens. They do also regret that they've got a fingerprint on one of the roundels, but in these images you can't really see that. I think you've done a lovely job of this kit. It does look very nice. I know that the sort of checkerboards and things are all decals, so primarily the red and the aluminium colour are what's painted, and you've got a really nice neat line between them. So yeah, good job. Thanks for taking part. Here we have a couple. These are two aircraft, Brewster Buffaloes from the US Navy combo build in 1/72 scale from Hasegawa. So the first one was from the USS Saratoga, which is the F28-1 number 1393, and the second one is an F2A2 from the USS Lexington with the number 1415. So we've got two similar aircraft here, but in slightly different paint schemes. They say it was a fun build overall, first attempt at airbrushing and masking. There are a few little messy areas that they're not entirely happy with, but generally, on the whole, they're quite pleased with the finished result. They have tried to do some chipping, and they used Vallejo chipping fluid, but they had a few little problems, and this caused the yellow wing paint to peel in a few places. They've tried to paint over the damage, but there are some noticeable parts in places. So they've used Vallejo Model Air and Model Color, and they also added some 3D printed interior upgrades such as cockpit sidewalls, a new floor, and improved scope. They say both kits went together fairly well. They have quite nice exterior and engine detail, but there were some fit issues around the canopy. A rewarding experience, and they are looking forward to applying everything they've learned in these builds on their future ones. And if you'd like to take a look at Lucas Sprue's build video for this, you can find it over on their YouTube channel. So this has pre-war United States Navy paint scheme colors, and as a result they stand out. I think pre-war US Navy, they were all painted brightly for identification purposes, but naturally over during the war you don't want your aircraft to stand out in the air, so they started painting them much more camouflaged. And that is pretty much that. So I did say we'd be about an hour, and we have more or less been spot on an hour. So what did you think of these submissions? Let me know down in the comments. And as mentioned earlier on, if you'd like to take part in the next group build, check out the link to Discord, because that's where they all happen, over on the Discord server, and you can find the link below in the description area. Make sure if you do come into the Discord server that you check out the rules before you get started. As always, honourable mention to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. A massive thanks to these guys on screen. And if you'd like to join them and find out what the perks of being a Model Club member are, check out the information below the video. Of course, if you'd like to support this channel, there are other ways to do so. Subscribing, if you're new here, would definitely be the best way to support the channel for free. And that is pretty much that. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me for this live stream, and I look forward to seeing you all again on the workbench for the next one.